Eleanor Hayes remained motionless at the bottom of the narrow staircase. The lantern in her hand trembled slightly, not from the movement of air, but from the strain in her fingers as she held it tighter than before. In front of her, the iron door stood partially open, not wide enough to offer comfort, not narrow enough to pretend nothing was there, just enough space to remind her that whatever waited beyond it was no longer hidden. The cold drifting from the opening felt different from the damp chill above. This air was older, still, as though it had been locked away from the rest of the world for far too long. Eleanor did not move immediately. At 75, hesitation had become familiar to her in ways younger people rarely understood, not because of weakness, but because life had taught her that some decisions could not be undone once made. And standing there now, lantern casting unsteady light across the stone walls around her, she understood clearly that stepping through that doorway would mark the end of whatever remained of her ordinary life. She lowered her gaze briefly toward the silver key still in her hand, small, worn smooth by time, a simple object that had somehow waited decades to return to her, not in a drawer, not in a locked box, but hidden inside a necklace she had carried unknowingly. As though someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it would find its way back to her only when the moment was right, or unavoidable, Eleanor slipped the key into the pocket of her coat, then adjusted her grip on the lantern, her breathing slowed, measured, controlled, a small act of discipline, one more breath, then another. And finally, without giving herself the chance to reconsider, she placed one hand against the iron door and pushed it open wider. The hinges resisted before giving way with a low metallic groan that echoed softly through the passage. The sound seemed louder than it should have, not because of volume, but because of how completely it filled the silence. The opening widened, darkness remained, no immediate movement, no visible shape, nothing rushed toward her, nothing announced itself, only the continuation of that stillness waiting on the other side. Eleanor lifted the lantern higher. Warm light spilled through the doorway in an uneven circle, stone floor, dust. More stone beyond, and what appeared to be the faint outline of walls extending deeper than she first expected. Not a small cellar, not a cramped storage space, something larger, deliberately built. She frowned slightly. That detail unsettled her more than anything she had seen so far. This was no accidental basement, no practical room for preserving food or storing tools. This space had been planned, constructed with intention. Her grandmother had not simply hidden a door beneath the cottage. She had hidden an entire place. Eleanor stepped forward, slowly. The sole of her shoe touched stone beyond the threshold. Then the next step followed. The lantern light shifted with her movement, revealing more of the underground chamber in fragments. A rough stone wall to her left, a wooden table further ahead, shelving along one side, barely visible beneath layers of dust. She paused just inside the doorway and turned slightly, taking in as much as the lantern allowed. The room was larger than expected, wide enough to hold far more than old memories. The ceiling arched slightly overhead, supported by thick beams darkened with age. Moisture clung faintly to sections of stone, giving parts of the walls a dull sheen beneath the light. The air smelled of earth, aged paper, cold metal, and something else she could not immediately identify, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. A scent preserved by years of enclosure. Eleanor moved another step inward, then another. Her lantern illuminated a wooden desk positioned against the far wall. A chair sat beside it, slightly angled as though someone had once stood from it in a hurry and never returned. Nearby, shelves lined with glass jars, stacked books, folded cloth, and unrecognizable objects occupied nearly an entire wall. None of it looked random. Nothing here suggested abandonment in the usual sense. Dust had gathered, yes, time had passed, but the arrangement remained too deliberate, too orderly. As if the room had been left exactly as intended. Her eyes shifted slowly across the chamber, taking inventory, noticing details. A coat hook fixed into stone, an iron chest near one corner, a faded rug partially curled at the edges, small candle holders mounted to the wall long melted into useless shapes. This place had not merely existed. It had been used, repeatedly, carefully, for a long time. Eleanor felt something tighten quietly in her chest, not fear exactly, not yet. Something closer to recognition without understanding. A strange awareness that this room belonged not only to her grandmother, but perhaps to a part of her family she had never truly known. She turned in a slow circle, lantern raised. Its light traveled across the walls, across shelves, across stone, and then finally settled on the far side of the underground chamber. Her breath caught slightly. There, beyond the desk and partially obscured by shadow, stood something larger than the surrounding furniture. A tall structure against the wall, wooden, cabinet-like in shape, its surface carved with patterns worn nearly smooth by time, not decorative, intentional, and positioned with a kind of importance that immediately drew her attention. Eleanor stared at it in silence. For the first time since stepping inside, she understood that entering this chamber had not answered her questions. It had only replaced them with larger ones. And somewhere within this underground room, her grandmother had left behind more than a locked door. She had left a history Eleanor was only now beginning to see.
Eleanor remained near the doorway for a moment longer, lantern lifted just high enough to keep the shadows from closing in around her. Now that she was fully inside, the room felt even larger than it had from the staircase. Not wide in a grand sense, but deep enough to suggest purpose. Every object appeared to have been placed exactly where it belonged. Nothing felt forgotten, only untouched. She stepped carefully across the stone floor. A thin layer of dust softened the sound of her movement, leaving faint footprints behind her. The chamber was colder than the cottage above, though not unbearable, just enough to remind her that sunlight had not reached this place in many years. Her lantern light passed slowly over the shelves first. Glass jars lined the wooden boards in uneven rows. Some contained dried plants reduced to brittle shapes. Others held materials she could not identify from where she stood. A few were empty. Their lids sealed tightly despite the passing years. Beside them were books stacked both upright and sideways, their leather bindings faded and cracked. No titles were visible from the spine. Several had strips of cloth tucked between pages as though someone had been in the middle of reading them and intended to return. But never did. Eleanor leaned closer. Her fingers hovered near one of the books before stopping. She withdrew her hand. Not yet. Instead, she moved toward the wooden desk. It was heavier than it first appeared, built from dark aged wood with deep scratches worn into the surface. Not damage, use. The kind created over time by repetition. A single candle holder sat near the corner, melted wax hardened around its base. Beside it rested a small brass object she did not recognize immediately. She lowered the lantern and examined it. A compass. Old, its glass slightly clouded, the needle inside still. She touched it lightly with one finger. Nothing happened. Her attention shifted to a stack of loose papers spread unevenly across the desk. The edges had yellowed with age, but many remained preserved surprisingly well. Carefully, Eleanor lifted the top sheet. The handwriting was neat, precise, not her grandmother's. At least not the version she remembered from birthday cards and household notes. This writing was firmer, more deliberate, as if whoever wrote it understood the importance of being clear. She scanned the first few lines. Her brow tightened slightly. Not because she understood what she was reading, but because much of it appeared structured more like records than letters. Dates, names, symbols drawn in margins, notes beside them. Not ordinary family paperwork, not household records, something else. She set the paper down and moved the lantern closer. Underneath the loose sheets was a folded photograph, black and white, its corners slightly bent. Eleanor picked it up carefully. Several people stood outside a house, not this cottage. At least she didn't think so. The image was faded, but one figure near the center immediately drew her attention. A woman. Young, dark hair pinned neatly back, serious expression. Even through the age of the photograph, Eleanor recognized her. Her grandmother, much younger than Eleanor had ever known her. Standing beside people Eleanor did not recognize at all. No familiar faces. No family members she remembered hearing about. Only strangers positioned too closely to be meaningless. She studied the photograph longer. Then something else caught her eye. A child, positioned near the front, partially hidden by the adults, small still, facing directly toward the camera. Eleanor brought the image closer to the lantern, her breathing slowed. The child looked familiar, not in the vague way old photographs sometimes do, specifically, painfully. Her expression changed. It was her. Or at least it appeared to be much younger. Perhaps 5 or 6 years old, standing in a photograph she had no memory of ever taking. Eleanor lowered the picture slightly. For a long moment she said nothing. Her eyes moved between the child and the woman beside her, her grandmother, both present in a memory Eleanor did not possess. A small crease formed between her brows. She turned the photograph over, nothing written on the back, no date, no explanation. Only silence pressing in around her again. She placed the photo carefully on the desk. This time her movements were slower, more cautious. The room no longer felt like a place containing old family belongings. It now felt like a place curated for a reason she had not yet grasped. She turned from the desk and continued deeper into the chamber. Along the far wall stood a narrow cabinet partially concealed behind hanging cloth. Its doors were slightly misaligned from age. She brushed the fabric aside. More objects inside, small boxes, metal containers, rolled documents tied with string, and near the bottom shelf, a velvet case. Dark blue, dulled with time. Eleanor crouched slightly and lifted it. It was lighter than expected. She opened it. Inside rested a pendant nearly identical to the one hidden in her handbag. Same oval shape, same engraved symbol. But this one was darker in color, slightly tarnished and attached to a thicker chain. Her face tightened. One necklace could be coincidence. Two could not. She closed the case slowly. Somewhere above her, beyond layers of floorboards and old timber, the cottage remained silent. But here below, surrounded by objects that connected too precisely to her own life, Eleanor began to understand something unsettling. Her arrival here had not been accidental, not entirely. Too many pieces were aligning in ways she could no longer dismiss. The key, the necklace, the hidden chamber, the photograph, and now this. She stood again, lantern raised. Her eyes traveled once more across the underground room. This time not as a stranger examining forgotten objects, but as someone beginning to suspect she had been brought back here by a history deliberately kept from her. And whatever explanation existed, it was somewhere in this room.
Eleanor placed the velvet case back onto the shelf, though her attention no longer rested on the objects around her the way it had moments earlier. Now, everything felt connected, not loosely, not by coincidence, deliberately. She returned to the desk, setting the lantern closer to the scattered papers. Its warm light spread across the wood, illuminating details she had overlooked before. A drawer sat slightly uneven beneath the right side of the desk, small, almost hidden in shadow. Eleanor reached for it and pulled. At first, it did not move. She tried again with more pressure. This time, it slid open with resistance. Inside was very little: a fountain pen, a folded handkerchief, and beneath both, a leather-bound journal, dark brown, worn heavily at the corners. Its surface carried the kind of age created by repeated handling, not neglect. Eleanor stared at it for a moment before lifting it out. She knew before opening it. This one belonged to her grandmother, not because her name was written anywhere visible, but because she recognized the care, the habit of preserving important things. Her grandmother had never thrown anything away that mattered. Eleanor opened the cover. The first page contained only a date written neatly at the top, nothing else. She turned to the next. Then the next, short entries, careful observations, names, dates, occasional symbols drawn in margins beside certain paragraphs. Her eyes moved faster now, scanning, searching. Then suddenly, she stopped. A single line had caught her attention. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was impossible to misunderstand. Asterisk, Eleanor must never know before the proper time. Asterisk, her breath slowed. She read the sentence again, then once more. There was no room for interpretation. Her name, written clearly, directly, not mentioned casually, not as memory, as instruction. She lowered herself slowly into the chair beside the desk, journal still open in her hands. Her lantern cast long shadows across the page. She continued reading. Several pages later, another entry appeared, longer this time, more personal, more urgent. The handwriting itself looked slightly less steady, as though written under strain. Asterisk, if she returns here one day, it will mean everything has already begun. Asterisk, Eleanor frowned. Her grip on the journal tightened. Returns, not visits, not arrives, returns. As if her presence here had been anticipated long before this night. Long before her son had forced her from home. Long before grief, loneliness, and desperation had brought her back to this forgotten cottage. She turned another page. A folded paper slipped from between the sheets and landed softly onto the desk. Eleanor picked it up. It was smaller than expected. A note, only one sentence written across it. Asterisk, the second chamber must remain sealed. Asterisk, nothing else. No explanation. No date. No signature. Just a warning. Short enough to feel intentional. Final. Eleanor stared at the note in silence, then slowly lifted her gaze from the paper. Her eyes moved toward the far corners of the underground room as if expecting the answer to reveal itself physically. But the chamber remained unchanged, still, cold, silent. Only now, the silence no longer felt neutral. It felt informed, as though this room had known something she was only beginning to uncover. Eleanor carefully folded the note and placed it beside the journal. For the first time since entering the basement, her attention shifted away from what had already been discovered, and toward what had not. A second chamber, not metaphor, not memory. A real place, somewhere nearby, still sealed, still hidden, and clearly important enough for her grandmother to warn against it more than once. Eleanor rose slowly from the chair, lantern once again in hand. Her eyes scanned the walls, the shelves, the stone floor, looking now with a different purpose than before. Not curiosity anymore. Direction. Whatever answers her grandmother had withheld all these years, they had not been left in plain sight. And somewhere inside this underground room, another secret was still waiting. Eleanor remained standing beside the desk, the journal still open where she had left it. For several seconds, nothing happened. The underground chamber returned to complete stillness. Only the lantern flame moved, small and steady inside the glass. She glanced once more at the note, resting beside the journal. The second chamber must remain sealed. The sentence sat heavily in her thoughts. Not because it explained anything, but because it confirmed something she could no longer deny. There was more hidden beneath this house than one underground room. And her grandmother had spent years making sure it stayed that way. Eleanor closed the journal carefully. The leather cover pressed shut with a soft sound. The moment it did, something shifted. A faint vibration passed through the stone beneath her feet. Small, brief, but unmistakable. Eleanor froze. Her eyes lowered immediately to the floor. The movement stopped as quickly as it came. She remained still, listening. Nothing. No repeated sound. No visible movement. Only silence. But now her attention had sharpened completely. She slowly lifted the lantern higher. Its light stretched across the walls and shelves, pushing shadows backward. The room appeared unchanged. Yet the stillness no longer felt inactive. It felt interrupted, as if something within the structure had acknowledged movement. Or contact. Eleanor took one cautious step away from the desk. Then another. Her breathing remained controlled, though slightly shallower than before. She turned toward the center of the chamber. Listening. A soft sound followed. Not from above. Not from behind. From somewhere deeper within the room. A dull mechanical click. So faint she might have missed it if she had moved even slightly faster. Eleanor stopped immediately. Her lantern hand tightened. She waited. A second sound followed several moments later. A low scraping noise. Stone against stone. Slow. Heavy. Then silence again. Her gaze shifted toward the far side of the chamber. Near the wall beyond the cabinet. At first, nothing looked different. Just stone. Haze. Dust. But as she narrowed her focus, something caught her attention. A fine line. Vertical. Too straight to be natural. Barely visible where two sections of stone met. Eleanor stared at it. Her expression changed slightly. She stepped closer. Slowly. The lantern light trembled faintly across the surface. Now she could see it more clearly. A narrow seam built into the wall itself. Hidden so carefully, it would have gone unnoticed without the shift in light. Or the sound. She approached until only a short distance remained between her and the stone surface. Her free hand rose cautiously. She touched the wall. Cold. Solid. But along the seam. Slightly uneven. Not part of the natural structure. A concealed section. Her fingers traced downward carefully until they brushed against something recessed into the stone. Small. Circular. She angled the lantern lower. There, partially concealed beneath years of dust, was a symbol carved into the wall. Her breath caught. It matched the engraving on both pendants. Exactly. Eleanor instinctively reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the necklace she had found upstairs. She pulled it free and held it beside the carving. Same shape. Same design. No difference. Her hand remained suspended in the air. For a moment, she did nothing. Then, from somewhere behind the hidden wall, a sound emerged. Low. Muted by thickness of stone. But close enough now to erase any uncertainty. Not imagination. Not settling pipes. Not shifting foundation. Something was beyond this wall. Eleanor lowered the pendant slowly. Her eyes remained fixed on the seam. Her face had gone still. Not from calm. From concentration. The kind that arrives when fear is forced aside by necessity. She now understood what her grandmother had meant. Not completely. But enough. This was it. The second chamber. Not theory. Not warning written for dramatic effect. A real hidden space built deeper beneath the cottage. And whatever had been sealed behind it was still there. The lantern flame flickered suddenly. Once. Twice. A stronger vibration moved lightly through the floor. Not enough to disturb her footing. Enough to remind her that something had changed the moment she found this wall. Eleanor stepped back one pace. Still facing it. Still listening. No further sound came. Only silence returned. But not the kind she had known before. This silence felt temporary. As though whatever rested behind the hidden stone barrier had already become aware that it was no longer completely hidden. Eleanor tightened her grip on the lantern. The chamber around her felt smaller now, more enclosed. Her eyes moved from the symbol to the seam, to the darkness gathering around the edges of the room. And for the first time since descending below the cottage, she understood clearly that finding answers here might come at a cost she had not yet imagined.
Eleanor remained in front of the hidden wall, lantern held just high enough to keep the carved symbol within view. Her breathing was slow, controlled. But her thoughts had become increasingly difficult to organize. Too much had happened in too little time. The photograph, the journal, her grandmother's warnings, the sealed chamber hidden behind stone. Each discovery had raised a new question before the previous one could settle. Now all of it had led her here, to a wall that was never meant to be found casually. Her eyes moved once more to the pendant in her hand. The engraved symbol caught the lantern light briefly before dulling again. Same shape, same design, same deliberate pattern carved into the stone before her, not similar. Identical. Eleanor stepped forward, carefully. She raised the pendant toward the circular carving in the wall. For a moment her hand hovered uncertainly. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, she pressed the pendant directly against the symbol. Nothing happened. At least, not immediately. She frowned slightly, maintained pressure. And then, a soft internal sound emerged from somewhere inside the wall. A click, small, mechanical, followed by another. Then a deeper shifting sound moved through the stone itself. Eleanor pulled her hand back immediately. The seam in the wall trembled faintly. Dust loosened from the edges and drifted downward. A low grinding noise followed as part of the stone surface shifted inward by a fraction, then slowly slid to one side. Eleanor stared in silence. Behind the moving stone was darkness. Not a hollow cavity, not storage. Another passage narrower than the first, older in appearance. Its entrance framed by stone worn smoother with age than the surrounding walls. The air that escaped from within was colder than before, noticeably colder, enough to make Eleanor instinctively tighten her coat around herself. She lifted the lantern toward the opening. The light entered only partially. A few steps became visible, descending again, not upward, not level, deeper. Her expression changed subtly. A second underground level, beneath an already hidden chamber. Her grandmother had not simply concealed a room, she had concealed layers. Eleanor remained motionless at the entrance. No immediate urge pushed her forward this time, only observation, caution. She had already crossed one threshold tonight. This one felt different, more final. Near the entrance of the newly opened passage, something rested against the stone floor, partially covered by dust. Eleanor lowered herself slightly and reached for it. A small wooden box. Rectangular, simple in appearance. No lock, only age-darkened wood and a lid fitted tightly shut. She brushed dust from the surface and lifted the top. Inside were several folded documents tied neatly with fatting ribbon. And beneath them, another photograph. This one clearer than the previous image, newer, less worn. Eleanor lifted it slowly. The lantern light revealed a group standing outside the cottage. Not strangers this time, family. Recognizable faces. Her grandmother, a much younger Eleanor, and beside them, a man she did not recognize, tall, serious, standing close enough to suggest belonging. Her brow tightened. She turned the photograph over. Words were written carefully across the back. Only one line. Asterisk for when Eleanor is finally ready to know the truth. Asterisk, she stared at the sentence without blinking. The room around her seemed to fade for a moment beneath the weight of it. Ready to know who was the man in the photograph? Why had every trail here led back to her specifically, not the family? Not descendants in general, her. A sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. Low, close, not from the chamber behind her, not from the walls, from below, deeper inside the newly opened passage. Eleanor's head lifted immediately. The sound came again, longer this time, not loud, but close enough now to remove all distance between possibility and reality. Something was below that second staircase. Not a memory, not machinery, not imagination, present, active, waiting. Eleanor slowly lowered the photograph. Her hand tightened around it unconsciously. The lantern flame flickered again, more sharply this time. She stepped toward the second opening without fully realizing it, one slow pace, then stopped herself. Her eyes remained fixed on the darkness below. She could go further. Nothing physically prevented her. No locked door remained, no barrier, only choice. But for the first time that night, Eleanor understood something with complete clarity. Crossing into this next chamber would not simply answer questions. It would begin something else entirely. And once begun, there would be no returning to the life she had known before. Not that much of it remained. The cold air continued rising from below. The sound did not repeat again. It did not need to. Its presence had already been established. Eleanor stood at the threshold of the second descent, lantern illuminating only the first few stone steps before surrendering to darkness. Her face remained still, unreadable, but her grip on the lantern had tightened enough to make her knuckles pale. She looked once more at the words written behind the photograph, then toward the staircase disappearing below. And in that moment, Eleanor Hayes realized that losing her home had never been the true beginning of this story. It had only been the event that forced her back toward something her family had spent decades hiding, something waiting beneath generations of silence. The lantern flame shifted once more. A faint movement echoed from below. Eleanor lifted her gaze and stared directly into the darkness ahead. Cut 2 Black TOB continued.